Welcome back, historians. Are you ready for another revolutionary journey? For this one, just make sure you don't forget your hammer and your, what is it called again? Yes, your sickle. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, and no, a sickle is not a cute name for a frozen treat. It's actually a semicircular blade that's used to cut grain. So, why are a hammer and sickle important? Well, you see, at first, they were used to represent the interests of construction workers and farmers coming together. But eventually, the combination evolved to represent the interests of workers all around the world. So then why do many of us associate it with words like communism, the Cold War, totalitarianism, and others? It's a valid question, and today you'll get an answer as we explore how Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks used symbols like these and other Marxist ideas to build a new society out of the ashes of the former Russian Empire. Let's take a peek at the questions that'll be guiding us along our journey. How did Lenin and the Bolsheviks consolidate power during the end of the 1910s? What steps did Lenin take to expand his power over Russia and the surrounding regions after the Russian Civil War? How were Stalin and Trotsky significant to the revolution and the development of communism in the USSR? And our big picture question, are violence and oppression justifiable methods for enacting reform in society? All right, let's dive in. We ended our last lesson during a pretty turbulent time in Russian history. The year was 1917 and female textile workers in Petrograd had just led a strike that sparked the February Revolution. Uprisings were so fierce that Tsar Nicholas II was forced to step down, leaving Alexander Kerensky to lead the provisional government, or Duma. That same year, Germany helped Vladimir Lenin return to Russia after his exile in Western Europe, hoping his presence would further destabilize the country and give the Central Powers an advantage on the Eastern Front of World War I. And boy, did Lenin destabilize. In less than a year, Lenin and the Bolsheviks executed a swift takeover of the Winter Palace and government offices, overthrowing Kerensky and the Duma during what we now call the October Revolution. A coalition government of Bolsheviks, Socialists, Mensheviks, and previous members of the Duma was formed. They organized an election for an assembly to draft a new Russian constitution. But when the Bolsheviks realized they had not won a majority of seats, they disbanded the assembly, leaving them in full control of the government. With a one-party system in place, Lenin and the Bolsheviks went to work instituting some immediate reforms. Many of these early reforms were in line with their slogan, peace, land, and bread. One of the biggest reasons the Bolsheviks prioritized these issues was to solidify the support of Russian farmers, workers, and soldiers. Economic reforms included returning control of factories to workers and instituting an 8-hour workday. Land reforms included redistributing farmland to peasants. And literacy campaigns as well as other educational reforms were introduced all across the country. But perhaps Lenin's most consequential decision was withdrawing Russia from the World War. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk officially declared an end to fighting between Russia and Germany, with Russia agreeing to cede territory and ship grain from Ukraine to the Central Powers. Many Russians resented the loss of territory as well as the new grain exports, which only worsened the ongoing famine in most of the country. The Cheka, or Lenin's secret police, didn't make it easy for Russians to voice their anger either. They used kidnappings, mass arrests, summary executions, and other forms of violence to silence anyone that was an enemy to the revolution. But the widespread anger couldn't be contained, and it eventually bubbled over into the Russian Civil War just a few months later. The Bolshevik Red Army now found itself at war with the White Army, which was made up of supporters of the old Tsarist regime, proponents for democracy, and socialists who opposed Lenin. Although the White Army enjoyed financial support from the US and other Western nations, it struggled to build momentum and was ultimately defeated by 1920. Lenin and the Bolsheviks were eager to capitalize on such a decisive victory and institute another round of sweeping reforms to bring their vision for a new Russia to life. But before we move on to those, let's review. How did Lenin and the Bolsheviks consolidate power during the end of the 1910s? Lenin and the Bolsheviks' first order of business after securing power was dealing with the aftermath of an intense and bloody civil war. The war not only destroyed Russia's economy, but it also contributed to the worst famine it had seen in over 20 years. These dire circumstances led to the creation of Lenin's new economic policy. This policy included changes like allowing peasants to profit from selling extra produce and crops, encouraging foreign investment, and allowing private ownership of small businesses and factories. Some Bolsheviks were angered by what Lenin called state capitalism, but these changes also led to an era of peace and prosperity that Russia had not seen in over a century. But Lenin wasn't satisfied. In fact, he was deeply concerned that the nationalism that swept across Europe during the war would spread eastward. So he worked with Joseph Stalin to create the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR. This created a federation of various self-governing republics that still fell under the power of one central government in Moscow, the USSR's new capital. Lenin hoped that by granting some degree of self-autonomy to regions, it would minimize the risk of any nationalist movements for independence. The state seal of the USSR even included a familiar symbol, the hammer and sickle, to represent the working class as central to the success of the new country. But Lenin wasn't finished. Instead, he sought to further solidify his power by creating the Communist Party. Lenin built the party upon a foundation of Marxist ideals, and the Communists went on to draft a new constitution in 1924 based on socialist and democratic principles. However, the party differed from Marx's original belief that the proletariat should lead the revolution, instead arguing that a small group of elites should lead the movement and that only Communist Party could do it. Lenin's own take on Marxism would eventually lead to the development of a new sect known as Leninism. But alas, Lenin did not have much time left to implement all of his revolutionary plans. Let's review for a second before we continue. What steps did Lenin take to expand his power over Russia and the surrounding regions after the Russian Civil War? Lenin's health began to decline severely by the end of 1922. Word spread that he had already suffered 2 strokes, and many began to ask who would succeed him as leader of the USSR, Leon Trotsky or Joseph Stalin. Trotsky was a former Menshevik who embraced Bolshevism after meeting Lenin during his exile in London. He was often praised for his intellect and capacity for administration, both of which were on display when he designed and went on to lead Lenin's Red Army. He also believed in the idea of permanent revolution, which called for the industrial proletariat to align with the peasantry to seize power in regions all across the world. Joseph Stalin, on the other hand, followed a slightly different path to leadership. Known less for his intellect and more for his ruthlessness, Stalin quickly rose up the ranks of Bolshevik leadership, often using violence and other manipulative tactics to advance the interests of the party. He even bestowed the nickname Stalin, or Man of Steel, upon himself. By the end of his life, Lenin believed that Trotsky was better suited to succeed him as leader of the USSR, even warning in one of his final letters, "Comrade Stalin, having become Secretary General, has unlimited authority concentrated in his hands, and I am not sure whether he will always be capable of using that authority with sufficient caution." But as the Secretary General of the party, Stalin had already begun appointing his supporters to key government positions. So, when Lenin died, Stalin did what he did best: seize control and never let go. Trotsky did not shy away from the conflict at first, instead leading a group known as the Left Opposition against Stalin's policies and leadership within the Communist Party. But he eventually fled the USSR, spending the rest of his life in exile until he was killed by a Stalinist agent in Mexico City in 1940. Before we wrap up, let's review one last time. How were Stalin and Trotsky significant to the revolution and the development of communism in the USSR? In the upcoming lessons, we'll explore how Stalin's policies and his own personality shaped the trajectory of the USSR and global politics as tensions began to build across Europe once more. However, there is much to learn from the story of Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Whether one considers their methods just or inhumane, their efforts led to the development of the first internationally recognized socialist state and inspired working-class revolutions around the world. Even their symbols still survive and elicit a wide range of reactions to this very day because, as we remember, history is everywhere.